Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn on Monday spoke about the National Defense Authorization Act. The Republican lawmaker urged her fellow senators to pass the NDAA in order to keep the U.S. safe and fully fund the military. Blackburn accused Democrats of turning the funding of the military into a political football by using the NDAA as a bargaining chip for other priorities. Republicans have long accused Democrats of using military spending as leverage for domestic policy goals, something their left-wing counterparts vigorously deny. The NDAA is traditionally a bipartisan effort and is expected to pass with minimal issue.
I ask that we suspend the quorum.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask unanimous consent that the following interns and fellows in my office be granted floor privileges for the remainder of this Congress. Jackson Hoppy, David Park, Martin Olliman, Surgeon Semenovic.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to begin by welcoming the Tennessee National Guard's 268th Military Police Company home after a 305-day deployment to Africa. We are so incredibly grateful for their service and for the service and sacrifice that their families make during these times of deployment. And I know I speak for every Tennessean when I say to them, welcome home, job well done. Well, the Senate is back in session, and all anyone back in Tennessee wants to know is, what will this chamber get done next? What is it that the Democrats are going to push next? And they're not feeling very optimistic right now. One thing is clear, and that is that my Democratic colleagues have completely ignored the stress that they're causing Tennessee service members and their families by dangling the NDAA in front of them and then snatching it away. Inaction sends a very powerful message, and right now all they're hearing is that the military has become a political football, and that does not inspire confidence. We have passed the Defense Authorization Act 61 years in a row, and I am confident that there will be bipartisan support for number 62, which makes this tight timeline even more unnecessary. The American people don't have all the details on what this authorization will do, but they don't need them to know that it's the only thing standing between us and getting steamrolled by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and the new axis of evil, which is Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Our service members might not know every line item in the 2,000 pages of the bill, but they know that its contents will determine the course of their lives for the next 5, 10, or 25 years. Passing this bill is the bare minimum as far as the Senate is concerned, but it means a lot to our men and women in uniform. Madam President, we're ready to get this thing done. I know that you, as a member of the Armed Services Committee who has worked so hard on this, you join me in being ready to get it done. We finished our committee work back in June on this bill. We considered more than 400 amendments. We adopted about 200 of those amendments, and it passed out of Armed Services Committee 23-3. So when I say we're ready to go, we are. There is bipartisan support for getting this finished. But as we prepare to move forward on this legislation, I want to highlight two of my own proposed amendments that unfortunately fell victim to partisanship. But first, here's a little background. Now, the Tennessee National Guard has a reputation for answering a cry for help no matter where it comes from. Last month, they deployed to Warren County, Tennessee, to help first responders gain control of a wildfire. In September, members of the 194th Engineer Brigade, the 278th Armored Cavalry Regiment, the 230th Sustainment Brigade, and the 230th Assault Helicopter Battalion deployed to Florida to help with the cleanup in the wake of Hurricane Ian. In July, members of Nashville's 230th Assault Helicopter Battalion pulled people to safety after flash floods destroyed communities in Kentucky. This year, the Guard has rescued multiple hikers who got into trouble on or near the Appalachian Trail. And last September, members of the 269th Military Police, the 913th Engineer Company, and the C Company 2nd Battalion, 151st Aviation Regiment made it home after spending more than a year helping law enforcement officials in Texas try to contain the border catastrophe. The sight of that National Guard uniform makes people in this country feel safe when things are going wrong. But the continued enforcement of the COVID-19 vaccination order will inevitably jeopardize that sense of security. I introduced 2 amendments to the 2023 NDAA that would have injected sanity into these vaccination requirements. The first would have prohibited involuntary separation of any service member for refusing the COVID-19 vaccine until each service achieves its end strength authorized by last year's NDAA. The second amendment would have made sure that members of the National Guard or Reserve maintain access to pay and benefits while their request for a religious or health accommodation was pending. This is about as non-controversial as you can get on the issue of vaccine mandates. These amendments would create a simple rule to stop this Biden Department of Defense from railroading their own troops. There is nothing political about preserving readiness and a basic sense of fairness which has been completely absent in this process. I'm going to use the Army as a case study to show you how destructive this mandate has been for the military. Now, the Army has not achieved the end strength authorized in the 2022 NDAA. What does that mean? It means that we don't have enough men and women doing the jobs, filling the slots that the Army has. The data backs this up. If you head over to Fort Campbell and ask anyone in uniform if this is true, they'll tell you that I'm 100% correct. They do not have enough people. Members of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment have been consistently deployed for more than 2 years, and we thank them for that service. I would encourage my Democratic colleagues to ask them what this Democrat-led administration's lack of attention to readiness and force strength could mean for our national security. What kind of impact does this have? This mandate has already separated 1,796 active duty soldiers from their service. What's worse, the Army has only approved less than 4% of medical exemption requests and just over 1% of religious exemption requests. The Guard is still in a holding pattern on the issue of separations, but their exemption denial statistics are just as troubling. 15% of medical exemptions have been approved, but only 0.0047 of religious exemptions. The reserves are not faring much better. The Army has only approved a little more than 5% of the medical exemptions and 0.00 0.0044% of their religious exemptions. Prospects are looking bleak for guardsmen with legitimate exemption claims, and it's pretty bleak for the military as a whole. The National Guard is already missing recruitment goals, and they're set to lose 9,000 members in fiscal year 2023 and 5,000 in fiscal year 2024. In the United States, the number of new service members joining the military has reached a record low. The Army alone fell 10,000 soldiers short of its goal for 2022 and is projecting a deficit of 21,000 soldiers for 2023. This administration knew manpower was a problem, but still they chose to fire service members who were perfectly healthy and ready to defend this great country. And so we shouldn't be surprised that 18-year-olds in this country don't feel that they can trust this Democrat-led administration at the Pentagon with full control of their young lives. The fact is, the Democrats have a perfect record of making decisions that end in a disaster. They spent trillions of dollars, provoked record-breaking inflation, and hired 87,000 new IRS agents to squeeze small businesses who are struggling to survive in communities all across the wonderful state of Tennessee. They've abandoned the southern border, and they've caused the worst illegal immigration crisis we have ever seen, the worst humanitarian crisis we've seen. And remember, it would be even worse if the Tennessee National Guard hadn't come to the rescue. They latched onto the Green New Deal and erased American energy independence. They backed shutdowns and mandates that destroyed the American workforce. They shuttered American businesses and sent our supply chains into a shamble. And let's be clear, they didn't make these decisions blindly. They had the same data that each member of this chamber has. They watched the news. They knew what they were doing. They knew it was wrong. They did it anyway. It was intentional. They are focused on an outcome. And now they're applying that same destructive strategy to the members of the U.S. military. Every year we come into this chamber and fight as hard as we can to make our military the most lethal fighting force in the world. We authorize billions of dollars for aircraft, for equipment, for weaponry. The NDAA represents an incredible investment in the future of this country, but it also represents the trust the American people put in this Congress to keep them safe and to keep the enemy at bay. I join my Republican colleagues, Madam President, in asking Leader Schumer to bring the NDAA to the floor so that we can get this very important piece of legislation to the President's desk. There is no reason for delay. And I also implore all my colleagues to remember that the greatest military in the world is nothing without the brave men and women and their families who have volunteered to be a part of it. We ask so much of them. They're already busy enough putting out fires, fighting wars. The least we can do is spare them the pain of fighting our political battles. I yield the floor. I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.